Creator and podcaster Perry Constantine, host of Superhero Cinephiles, has a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Visit percivalconstantine.com/DFK or click the link in the show notes. Fill out the form and then get 2 free novels and 1 free superhero short story. The novels are Vanguard, Heroes Forged, an Avengers-inspired team of superheroes, and Ronin Born, a cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic, fascist Japan. The short story is Omega Knights, Fire and Lightning, a Power Rangers-inspired prequel to an upcoming serial. Take advantage of this offer today, and be sure to catch Superhero Cinephiles on all major podcast platforms. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville Rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation. From its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years, to this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 11, The Man in the Lead Mask, is Wearing the Cape cosplayer and returning guest, Daniel Sanchez. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me again. I feel almost like a regular cast member.
Yeah, man, you're back here for Season 2. I know that Season 2 contains your all-time favorite episode, Around the World with Superman, the last episode of Season 2, and you're going to be back for that at the end of the year, which I'm really excited for. But let me ask you the question I've been asking everyone when they come on for these Season 2 installments. Now that we are in the second season of the show, we've had the shift from the gritty, noirish first season. We haven't yet gotten into the really kid-friendly color years. Just kind of overall impressions and feelings towards Season 2?
I think I probably echo a lot of sentiments where I'm such a big Phyllis Coates fan that the adjustment to Noel Neill and the lightening of the tone throughout the whole season is an adjustment. But I think it's a kid's show. It was meant to be a kid's show. And before we get into the truly young audience seasons later, this is probably a sweet spot. So, I mean, it's still of the top 2, my favorite seasons.
Fair enough. Now, I do record a little bit ahead, so this is the first opportunity I've had to address this on the show. As of this recording, it hasn't yet been officially confirmed, so that might change by the time people hear this. But a little while back, there was a YouTuber who shared quote-unquote inside industry information. Apparently, Warner Brothers is restoring Adventures of Superman in preparation for a Blu-ray release of the complete series next year. I'm sure you saw this on social media.
I did.
So, needless to say, I could not be more excited. This source on YouTube seems to be reliable, so much so that I feel confident in displaying a measure of enthusiasm towards this. This seems like it's legit. Obviously, we'll know for sure when we get that official confirmation, but this is something that has come up over and over. I hope no one has made a drinking game out of how many times the lack of availability has been bemoaned on this podcast, because you'd be in really rough shape. But it's something that since I started this, I've longed for people to have easier access to this show. And honestly, selfishly as well. It's like, I would love to be able to watch this in the best audio-visual presentation possible. And really selfishly, I hope that if and when it's available on a Blu-ray, it will encourage more people to come to this podcast, because now it'll be easier for them to watch along with us. So all of this is tremendously exciting. Would that be a purchase for you if and when that happens?
Oh, 100%. I myself am looking forward to my grandfather days where I can have my grandchild on the couch with me. And this is a really good entry point to Superman, because the strong Clark that's in these first 2 season episodes shows that you don't have to be a superhero in a costume to be a worthy member of society and to have close relationships and to feel proud about who you are. Clark Kent, the reporter, is who I want to show my grandchildren. And I want to do it in the best possible quality with the best possible sound and really make that a bonding grandson, grandfather experience. I have nothing but crossed fingers that this comes to pass.
No, absolutely. I love that. And I hope, and I'm confident that you'll have that opportunity to do that. And yeah, I couldn't be more excited. I will be anxiously awaiting more news about this, but it's long overdue. This show more than deserves it. It has more than earned its place in history and Superman mythology. And so to have it out there for everyone to enjoy, I mean, I hope that hand in hand with this, it'll pop up on Max or another streaming service. That would be great as well. The more ways that people can watch this, in my mind, the better. I shared this news with fellow guest Rich Roney, who was on the show for our last episode, and he'll be back next week for Panic in the Sky. He similarly was excited, and bless his heart, he's like, I think, it's because of the podcast. And I was like, I don't think so. I said, that's very kind. I said, if anything, it probably has to do with the fact that we're getting a new Superman movie, right? Because we saw this back when the 2006 Superman Returns movie was coming out. All of these projects started coming out on DVD and whatnot. And I think, if anything, that's probably what's greased the wheels. But I appreciate his sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully this isn't Charlie Brown's football. Hopefully this time it really happens. And, I guess all we can do is encourage all the listeners, support the industry because it's your wallet that speaks. Even for tonight's episode, there might have been other ways for me to have gotten this episode, but I bought it on Amazon for the $1.99 because I wanted the numbers to reflect the interest of our fandom. So I guess that's our way to help this become real.
Yeah, right on. All right. So let us get into The Man in the Lead Mask. So this aired November 28th, 1953, written by Roy Hamilton, directed by George Blair. Here is my fairly detailed synopsis, and then we'll unpack everything as we always do. Public enemy Marty Mitchell claims to his fellow criminals that a doctor was able to change his face through plastic surgery and, rather unbelievably, alter his fingerprints as well. When Mitchell baits the Daily Planet crew to have him arrested, after which the police are unable to match his prints to the one on file for Mitchell, the other criminals are convinced and agree to perform crimes wearing lead masks to obtain money for surgeries of their own. Ultimately, Superman tracks them to their hideout, dons a lead mask of his own for an undercover mission, and finally reveals to all that the real Mitchell had never undergone any surgery, but rather used a double to pose as him all along. Overall impressions of this one?
So I remember being a kid, watching these still on our black and white television at home. And I am a huge Alexandre Dumas fan. So I had already read The Man in the Iron Mask. And I saw that beautiful placard that comes up, the title card at the beginning of every Adventures of Superman. And it said The Man in the Lead Mask. And I thought, oh, they're going to do their homage to the Dumas story. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with the Dumas story. But beyond that, I thought they did mix a couple of clever premises here. And one of my takeaways that I remember as a child was that in this episode, con men conned other criminals, and that it wasn't always innocent victims of Metropolis who were just living their good lives and the criminals were the danger towards them. They were doing it to each other. And, that was sort of an eye-opening thing for a kid to realize that goes on. And then any undercover story, I think, is kind of fun because it can go south. You can get caught. You can get revealed. No undercover mission is a guarantee. So for those two things, I think it kept me edge of my seat, wanting to know how it would end, and it had a pretty good ending.
Right on. Aside from The Man in the Iron Mask, the other thing, of course, that it makes me think of, they don't share any parallels narratively other than a mask and a double, but the Onyx episode from Smallville, where Lex is split into two, to good Lex and bad Lex, and the bad Lex imprisons the good one in the basement of the mansion and puts him in the mask. So we always go back to Smallville here. But I had a really good time with this episode. My memory of it wasn't super sharp going into this. And obviously it comes in between The Face and the Voice and Panic in the Sky, which I would argue are the two best episodes of the series. And so I was a little wary. I was like, oh, okay, like we'll see how this one is sandwiched there in between. But I really enjoyed it. And your point is spot on that the fact that it's the criminals getting conned puts a clever spin on it. I really only have one critique, and unfortunately it will dock it a fedora in the end. But my only critique is I feel like there needed to be one other twist or angle or dynamic. I felt like it got very repetitive at a certain point about this business of it's impossible to change fingerprints. Yet it seems like that's what this guy has done. And I felt like, especially when we get to that scene, which we'll talk about between Henderson and Clark when they're playing darts, I felt like we were just hearing the same thing over and over. And that's the point in the episode where I think I just wanted just something else. And I don't know what. I don't really have a fix for it, but just some other angle or dynamic. It just felt like it was getting a little repetitive. But other than that, I really enjoyed it a lot. I thought it had a great payoff, and it was a solid episode.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't know what to say to that, except perhaps some episodes the writers have to pad it out, or they just want to make absolutely sure the audience gets something, and maybe they go a little much.
You know what? Honestly, I think both of those are fair and probably the case. That scene with Clark and Henderson in particular, though, as I was watching it, yes, it could very well be that they were like, okay, we really need to make sure the kids get exactly what's going on. But that scene in particular really made me feel like they were a couple minutes short. And they were like, all right, what can we do? And it's like, all right, we can have them talking about the case and playing darts. And even though it did grate on me a little bit, I did like the two of them having that back and forth while they're playing darts, and Clark wins and he tells Henderson, you owe me another dinner. So again, it's like they've got their own thing going on here that you never get to see them out at dinner collecting on these bets, but they're doing this. And just to see that camaraderie and that rapport between them, so there was value to that scene, even if plot wise, I kind of felt like it was spinning its wheels, in fairness.
Yeah. And I think it had something to do with that. If you're trying to convince conmen that this is possible, I guess you need the balance on the other side of everyone else saying that it's not possible. Otherwise, the majority of the conversation makes you think, well, maybe it is. So they had to balance it out with equal time, perhaps. But and we'll get to this later. But the dart playing time, the friendship with Henderson, that deep friendship is probably the only reason that Henderson lets Clark Kent walk out of the police station with crucial evidence, just with the promise of, I'll bring it back tomorrow.
Yes, I know. I know. He asks for the mask that they've confiscated. He's like, sure, no problem.
Right. Yeah. The smoking gun. Can I just borrow that?
Yeah. No. And the other thing that I really did like is that Clark really is the one throughout the episode who, despite everyone saying it's impossible, he knows there's something amiss, right? And he follows that thread to its conclusion. So I like the tenacity, and going back to what you said at the top, just about this Clark and how dogged and tenacious he is. And especially the whole bit at the diner. There's very, very intriguing stuff here. So we can get into it real quick. We'll do our guest cast breakdown here. We had Frank Scannell as Canfield. This is allegedly Mitchell after he's had his surgery and fingerprint alteration. But as we find out at the end, of course, it was never him at all. John Crawford as Jack Morrell, Louis Jean Haight as Paulie, Paul Breyer as Scott, John Merton as Doc, Joey Ray as the real Marty Mitchell we meet at the very end, and Lynn Thomas as the waitress. Going through their IMDb's, there was nothing in particular that like really jumped out at me. Is there anything about this guest cast that rang any bells with you, or just anything you wanted to share about any of those folks?
No, I didn't have any other associations with this cast, so it was sort of a pure experience.
Right on. One thing I will say, and I never offer this kind of commentary, and I say this in a respectful way, but Lynn Thomas as the waitress, she was gorgeous. That brief moment in the diner there, but she was just so strikingly beautiful. That's all. All right. Shall we go to our scene by scene discussion?
Let's do it.
All right. So I'll lay out the main beats, and then whatever jumps out of you, whatever we want to talk about, we'll get into it. So we have this whole opening sequence where you have a man in a lead mask breaking into the post office and shattering the glass and taking the wanted poster featuring Public Enemy Marty Mitchell. And as he's leaving, has this interaction that leads to a shootout with a police officer on duty there. So they shoot back and forth. And of course, the guy gets into his car and gets away. And then the next day at the Daily Planet, we have a scene with Clark and Lois discussing this with Perry. A lot of speculation. Why would someone break into the post office? Why would they take this wanted poster of Mitchell? All sorts of theories are thrown out there. Maybe it is Mitchell, or someone knows about Mitchell or has some connection. And it's, I believe, Lois, right, who zeroes in on the lead mask angle here, and the fact that it's known that Superman can't see through lead. So maybe that was the motivation for that, to try to keep Superman at bay. Anything stand out about this kind of opening package of scenes here?
Yeah, a couple of things. As you're first watching this, you don't know what's going on, and you see this very awkwardly walking man who clearly can't see very well out of this very, very heavy mask. Which, by the way, me being me, I looked up the scientific weight of lead compared to other metals. It is almost twice as heavy as iron. And if you were to compare the lead mask shown in this episode to, say, a motorcycle helmet, it's anywhere from 5 to 10 times heavier than the most durable motorcycle helmet that you can buy. So it's almost immobilizing, the weight, were this to be truly lead. And at one point you see him almost like walk into a wall because he can't quite adjust to get through the front door. But the fact that he uses a gun to smash the glass, you think, okay, but it's just a contrivance so that he has a gun in his hand when a police officer says, stop. And then next thing you know, bullets are flying on a public street. And I do remember thinking, well, that escalated very quickly. There are innocent people that are outside at this time. And the policeman, I counted the shots, he emptied his pistol at this criminal who shot 4 shots of his own. And with the exception of a tiny chip of lead being shot off the mask, neither of the two of them hit anything.
Right.
The policeman didn't hit the car. He didn't hit the tires. None of them were wounded. It was just your typical 1950s shootout. And I thought, well, I guess that's just, we have to have an appreciation that this guy's a really bad man if he would shoot at a cop. And now we know.
Yes. It's funny. That did stand out to me as well. And it did make me think of one of my absolute all-time favorite movies, It's a Wonderful Life, because we do get to that moment where we're in the alternate timeline where George Bailey was never born, and he decks Bert the cop and starts to run away. And then Bert just opens fire. I mean, here, mercifully, they didn't show us any pedestrians. You have to assume that they're there on the street. But in It's a Wonderful Life, it's like, there's all these people around. It's insane. Mm-hmm. Like, it's crazy. It made me think of that. And that's an interesting point about the weight of the lead. Yeah, you definitely get the sense that would be very challenging to move around. And these are not, they're not small masks. I mean, they're quite the coverings, these things.
Right. For any viewer who hasn't seen this episode, you almost have to imagine one of those antique diving helmets that go to the shoulders and about halfway down, almost Adam West cowl in the front. That's how far down to the collarbone this would go.
Yeah. So after that scene at the Daily Planet, we go to the hideout where this man in the lead mask, allegedly Marty Mitchell, is there with his other cronies. And we find out the reason he took that wanted poster was because it had Mitchell's fingerprints, and he wanted to be able to compare his with what's on the wanted poster. Because what he's trying to convince everyone, they're all wanted men, right? None of them can show their faces in the city. They all need money. They're in a tough spot. And he's trying to convince them that this doctor who's there with him not only performed plastic surgery to change his physical appearance, but also did what is allegedly scientifically impossible, changed his fingerprints. Because he's trying to get the rest of them to pay for these surgical procedures of their own. And it's quite the price tag. It's $25,000 for the plastic surgery and another $25,000 for the fingerprint alteration. So $50,000 in 1953. It's quite the price tag.
Would you like to know what that is today?
Is it about $500,000?
Over. It's 5.8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a hefty sum. And these guys, to their credit, they're skeptical, they're dubious. Even with the wanted poster, they're still not convinced. Like, oh, he could have changed it on the way over, or whatever the case may be. They're still not totally buying this. All right. And of course, that will lead to this whole diner exchange that's about to come. But anything else about that hideout scene that stood out to you?
Just that it's just your typical 1950s criminals, and it's a scene that we just accept and get through to get to the rest of the story. But later, when we learn more about some of these characters, you really appreciate the bluff, just the straight face and the total commitment to this con.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we leave that scene with Mitchell claiming, all right, like you want it from the top, you want proof from the top, like I'll get it for you. And then we're at Pep's Diner, and Mitchell, quote unquote, Mitchell comes in and sits down. What does he order? A buttermilk? Was that his order, I think?
Something like that, yeah.
And meanwhile, you have Clark and Lois having a coffee together at the table. And I know I say this every episode. I'm like, I don't want to keep beating up on the season 2 version of Lois, but it's like, what is she preoccupied with in this scene? If she gets that $10 raise, she'll be able to buy that hat. Like that's her whole thing. I long for the season 1 iteration, and I guess I'll leave it at that. I feel like I'm just be belaboring the point at this juncture. But Clark, right, notices this guy because he hears this guy's voice when he places his order. And also this guy, allegedly Mitchell, right, is tapping his finger on the counter. And so Clark clocks the voice sounds like Mitchell, but of course doesn't look like him. And the mannerism, specifically the tapping of the finger, reminds him of Mitchell. And we'll go from there. But what I like about this scene overall is that they're both sides are playing each other, right? Like Mitchell wants to catch the attention of these top reporters. He even asks the waitress, like, oh, we're across from the Daily Planet. Like, any reporters come here? And she flags the 2 of them for him. So he wants this, right? Because he wants to be able to use this to prove his point to the rest of them. And then, of course, meanwhile, Clark will hatch his plan to try to get this guy's fingerprint. So I like that angle in the scene.
It is. I mean, the fact that Clark won't take the mate immediately is the great part of the scene, because it's a reverse game of chicken. Mitchell keeps wanting him, no, take me now, take me, I need to get arrested so I can prove what I need to prove to my associates. And Clark won't go for it. Clark's methodical. He's a good reporter. He knows better, at least in this episode. So that opposite bluff is great to watch.
Yeah. What do you think season 1 Clark would have done? I feel like season 1 Clark would have just tapped him on the shoulder, punched him in the face and hauled him in.
Probably. Yeah. I did spend a minute wondering, how is it that Clark knows the mannerism so well that by a tapping finger he would, but then I thought, let's do some headcanon. If there were ever a trial and Mitchell were on the witness stand for any length of time, or just sitting next to his lawyer at the defense table, that would have been an ample opportunity for Clark in attendance at that trial to truly learn a lot of those mannerisms. So I could totally see him at a diner with his eagle eye supervision, catching that as quickly as we were showing.
Yeah, you know what? I'm with you. And I feel like we've had instances on this show, even in this season, where they're talking about criminals that they've reported on. And you really get the sense with Lois and Clark that they've studied these people, that they've spent time and presumably at a trial or something to that effect. So yeah, that I was totally fine with that. And like you said, Clark is very methodical about this, and Lois warns him too, because he presents this theory to her and she warns him about the dangers of making a false arrest and opening himself to a lawsuit. So his play is to go up to the counter and ask for a glass of water, and then make his way over to the telephone booth where he places a phony call essentially to Jim at the Planet. And when the waitress places the water on the counter, he asks Mitchell, the guy, I don't know what the best thing is to call him. But in any event, Mitchell at the counter to pass him the glass. And of course, then that allows Clark to have his fingerprints. What did you think about the conversation between Clark and Jim?
Which one?
When that initial call where Clark is essentially biting his head off for this, what is it? Driving his car off a cliff or like something like that?
Right. Yeah. So Clark needs to have a convincing end of the conversation from the phone booth, and poor Jim has no idea. He's just listening to this barrage of nonsense as far as he's concerned. And he keeps going, what? I don't understand. But yeah, he played that comedy bit pretty well.
Yeah. And you know what? To Jim's credit, he displayed more savvy here than I would expect from him, because he picks up on, he's like, oh, you can't talk? right? And
Mhm.
figures out where he needs to go. So I like that. And then I guess our next bit here is Clark with Perry at the Daily Planet, where Perry, as we find out, spent 20 years as a police. What a background this guy's had. He was the mayor of Metropolis, like 20 years as a police reporter, and so he knows how to examine fingerprints. Right? He busts out his kit and everything, and tells him to hold the presses because this might be the guy. They might have actually found Marty Mitchell and all that.
I have that in huge letters in my notes. I said he was the mayor. He can do fingerprints. What else can Perry White do? And likewise, I thought about this and I thought, okay, that I could see that he would have just taught himself at some point in order to not jump the gun, especially in situations where you're dealing with dangerous criminals. I don't know if that was something that perhaps in his military service he might have come across, but I see Perry very much as somebody who would have just bought his own kit and taught himself for exactly these situations.
Yes. And also going back to what we were saying with Clark and Henderson and the fact that Clark can just walk off with this evidence, you get the sense too that Perry probably had a very close relationship with law enforcement. I mean, to the point where they would outsource their fingerprint work, probably not, but I don't know, just the idea that whether they directed him to educate himself, or like you said, he took it upon himself, given that working relationship and the beat he was on. Yeah, I can buy that. I like that. I love these little morsels that are just like dropped in here. It's like, okay.
Well, and again, you think you latch on to a good headcanon and then you just reinforce it as, oh, that's brilliant. But I could imagine back in the day when Perry was the young, hot mind, out on the street and fancied, himself somebody who could really make a change, that he would not want to be the reporter who cried wolf. He would not want to be the one who got it wrong. He would want to keep as much trust with the real detective force and the real police force as possible. So I could very much see him safeguarding that reputation and teaching himself to look before he leaps with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Unfortunately for Clark, in this instance, the fingerprints don't match. And in the interim, Jim has gone down to the diner and didn't want perhaps Mitchell to get away. So he physically intercepts him and has this guy arrested. And then, of course, at the police station, as we've already learned from Perry's analysis here, the fingerprints on this guy do not match Mitchell's. And so then you have this exchange between Clark and Mitchell outside. This guy claims his name is Canfield. So maybe we'll go with that. So the scene between Clark and Canfield outside the police station, where he's willing to let all of this go, right? And not pursue a lawsuit against the Daily Planet or anything like that in exchange for a story being written about all of this, how he was mistaken for Mitchell and was arrested and fingerprints were taken and didn't match. So again, the antenna for Clark way up at this point. This is highly unusual.
Yeah. Yeah. And even as the audience, we get, oh, now we see why Lois was so harping on the fact that if you do a false accusation, you're going to put the newspaper in a lot of liability. So now we, the audience, are aware. Oops. So now this offer is Clark's free pass out of that. So, we've gone down this other path of the episode, but now we know why. But there in the acting portrayal that George Reeves does here, he does one of my favorite things about his Clark Kent is that smirk, that confident, hands in his pockets, wide stance, squinty-eyed, looking at you like, I'm on to you. And he just has that smirk. And, he basically just says, just keep talking. I mean, this game of chicken will continue. And now he's going to put it back on Mitchell, who he knows is Mitchell, to do the thing that every criminal does, which is you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves. And so he just stands there with the smirk like, yeah, just keep talking. None of your insults, sticks and stones, but you might slip. You might say something that my reporter ears are going to latch onto. And so that's the Clark I love, that he's out there in the street letting this guy gloat and have his imagined victory. But he now is the one falling in Clark's trap. And at this point in the episode, I'm totally hooked. I want to see how this joust plays out.
Totally. And also at this point, we're fairly deep into the episode at this point. Still no Superman appearance. And we're still all in, right? When you have this kind of Clark, he really can drive the action. And again, I don't know a kid watching this in the 50s if they were like, where's Superman? But, for me and for us watching this, it's like fully invested in Clark's investigation here. So I think it plays really well. What kept going through my mind, though, in this scene where it's like, all right, if you write the story, I won't file a lawsuit. It's like, we gotta get this in writing. It's like really just kind of taking a lot on faith here, but it's all right. So then that takes us to that scene that we had talked about earlier with Clark and Henderson playing darts. And again, Clark knows something is up here, but the only possible solution at this point, right, is that the fingerprints were changed, which all of them, seem to be on the same page that that's not possible. So a big open question here as they're playing this game of darts. I mostly said what I had about this when we talked about it earlier. Was there anything else about this dynamic between Henderson and Clark that you wanted to talk about?
Yes. So beyond the respect that they have for each other, I think Henderson always allows Clark the leeway that he might crack the case. He might have that one bit of information that his own detectives didn't have. So I think he always lets Clark in the door if he wants to talk about a case, which I kind of liked. But at the same time, he doesn't pressure Clark if he doesn't have anything. It's fine for them to just spitball and, put a pin in the crime wall and see if together they might put their brains on it and come up with something. And so that's what I was expecting in this scene.
Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah.
Now let me preface a little bit for the listeners. As a kid, I wanted to be a detective. I read all the Encyclopedia Brown books. I read the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, Sherlock Holmes, anything that I could get my hands on. And I really thought, I'm going to train my mind to be like these detectives. So as a child, I thought, I'm working on my radar. I'm going to try and see, like, what should a good investigator do right now in this moment? And they didn't do any of the things that I thought they were going to do, because I myself had a million questions. So Marty Mitchell is claiming to be Marty Canfield. Okay. And his fingerprints do not match Marty Mitchell. So does Marty Canfield exist? If he is a regular upstanding citizen, then he should have a life that can be easily discovered, even in the 1950s, even pre, current technology. Social Security number started in 1936. So they'd been around for 17 years. Marty Canfield should have a Social Security number. He should have a driver's license. He should have a voting card. He should have a high school transcript. If he's ever had a criminal arrest of any kind, Marty Canfield would have a criminal record, and he's clearly hanging out with thugs. So that's where I thought this scene was going to go, is that Henderson would ask some of those questions, or Clark would bring that up, like, hey, I'm here to see if you can pull the records for Marty Canfield. I'd like to find out if he exists. But instead, the episode continues because that would have, I guess, meant it was over. But in my own way, I appreciated the fact that as an episode, it gave me the chance to use my detective brain and be a participant in the goings on and in the events that were playing themselves out. And even if that it didn't go where I thought it would, I still felt active in it. And what a great story it is that can draw you in to that extent where you practically feel like you're a part of that group trying to solve this. So I loved that scene, even though it was for my own reasons.
No, very cool. And look, those questions are more than valid. I am a little surprised that Clark didn't follow that thread. Unfortunately, I'm not too surprised about Henderson. His deductive ability always leaves something to be desired. So I'm not shocked that as far as he's concerned, I think his view on this and probably the police down at the station, it was just, well, he's not this guy according to the fingerprints. And that was probably the end of their inquiry, as opposed to, well, if he's not that guy, then who is he?
Right.
And to your, I think for them, it was just like, oh, he's not this guy. Have a good day.
Have a good day. And then I did sort of smile that for the reputation that we associate with Superman, that he's always good. I'm not sure how fair it is to play darts against Superman.
I was just going to say, do you think well, look, this isn't, in the Superman mythology and fandom, right? I feel like this is an open question / ongoing debate. It's like, can he play and not use his abilities? I mean, we've seen plenty of instances of that, like in the comics or elsewhere, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm not using my powers, but it's like, how feasible is that really? And I don't know, this Clark, he probably would just use his powers.
And I would be fine with them playing darts if he let Henderson win, but Clark got himself a dinner out of it. So in a way, he's sort of super cheating the police chief of Metropolis to get food. So yeah, I just sort of wondered about, maybe it's Clark's way of just venting just a tiny bit. If he has to be such, what is it on the scale of good? Is it virtuous good, righteous good? What's the topmost corner that you can be? Virtuous good, right?
I'll go with that. Sure.
Yeah. I think maybe if he has to be such virtuous good, like a paladin all the time, he allows himself these tiny little things like, okay, but I'm going to use my skills at dart to beat Henderson and get a dinner. And that's my own tiny little way of not going absolutely paladin crazy.
I like that. We'll go with that. Now,
but I don't think the 1978 Pa would have appreciated this Clark showing off.
No. And I am really overthinking this, but it's like, I wonder where Clark wants to go to collect on this bet. I mean, I bet it's probably like a nice steakhouse in the city that he would want to go to. I mean, we've had business about, he knows about the Tip Top Club and Metropolis. This guy lives a life. So I feel like this probably cost Henderson a pretty penny.
Right. Yeah. He scams the police chief out of dinner and then goes to get into his beautiful convertible and drives away.
Yeah. And you know what? Because we just did the Dog Who Knew Superman episode. Where the hell were the driving gloves in this episode?
Yeah.
I guess he learned his lesson after the last time. It's like, you lose one, it almost, you know what? I take it all back. There's actually a legitimate reason why he would no longer wear driving gloves after the Dog Who Knew Superman. It actually makes sense.
The smell.
Yeah. No. So, okay. I'll go with that. But anyway, we're back at the Crooks hideout here. And now with this story in the Daily Planet, right, it seems to have them convinced. So now they're on board with getting these surgeries, but they don't have the money for it. So the solution, of course, is, commit robberies to get the money to pay for the surgery. The further complication that one of the guys brings up is, well, we're all wanted men. We can't show our faces. And that's when Mitchell has this whole bit about, the lead mask, you thought that was just grandstanding, right? Well, it wasn't. Right? It protected my identity, and Superman can't see through lead. So they all agree, right? They're going to go about this business of committing these crimes wearing the lead masks, just like Mitchell had done when he stole the wanted poster. Mm-hmm. So they're all in at this point. But I mean, good on them, I guess, that they demanded multiple levels of proof of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you even have the one criminal who apparently knows more about science than the rest of them, who's just constantly insisting it's not possible. So they're not complete dubes, but they end up forming their own little sort of Red Hood gang of we each take our turns with the mask and we each pull off our own heists and then we save up the money. But I do love how later on there's a scene where one guy's come up short and Marty's like, no, you don't have it all. Like, it's a 50. It's not 30. It's 50. Go back, pull off another heist. There's no quarter given.
No, none at all. And I know the poor guy, he's like, well, I'll get the rest, like after I get the surgery. Now I'm really splitting hairs here, but in that scene, I think, Mitchell says like, well, all right, you'll get the face surgery. And then when you come up with the rest, we'll do the fingerprints. Do it the other way around. Like if I were that other guy, we get the fingerprint surgery first. I feel like that's because you could disguise your face in other ways, right? In the interim, but having clean fingerprints, that to me would seem like the bigger get in this. But in any event, but you're right. There's no leeway here. But so one of them, Morrell, he knocks over a jewelry store, right? I believe, while Clark is sitting at home alone in his apartment, just listening to the police radio. And then he hears about this, springs into action. We get our first appearance of Superman. And Morrell is in the car making his getaway, and Superman lands in front of the car and stops it. I thought that was actually pretty cool the way they pulled that off. What did you think?
I was very impressed. I mean, it didn't look stop motion. It didn't look like they slowed the film down too much. You could see just maybe a hint of it. But all things considered, it was a great effect for that time, because that's a real car. And that's really George Reeves standing in front of it. And it really was moving towards him. So I gave that multiple fedoras. That was a well-conceived trick that they pulled off.
Yeah, you know what? I think they were ambitious in that, and I admire them for it, because they could have done it differently, where they really were cutting around it and you didn't need to show that much, but they showed you. And even, maybe you could see some of the seams a little bit, but overall it was effective. This guy gets a concussion, though. I mean, I feel and there's no remorse or anything on, on Superman's part or anything later from Clark. It's just like, this is what this guy gets.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this is the tough guy Clark and the tough guy Superman of, you walked this side of the path, buddy, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah. No, I really have no qualms about that. There's something like delightfully refreshing about it. And I have to imagine the lead mask, it didn't help matters.
No. Almost you would imagine that cartoon comedy bit inside the mask of his head just going bung, 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 bung,
Yeah. And then you have Clark and Henderson with Morrell in the hospital after, and Morrell is really out of it. And he's talking about the face and the hands, right? And I thought the camera angle in this scene was interesting. I feel they really were low, like shooting up in a way that I don't feel like you see that angle a lot on the show. It just kind of stood out to me. And I mean, it wasn't like radically different, but I felt like they were shooting from a lower angle than they normally do of Clark and Henderson. And I don't know, it just stood out to me. But anyway, this question continues to persist, right? Especially now with Morrell talking about the fingers or the hands, whatever it is that he says. And Clark, again, is bringing up this issue of the changing of the fingerprints. And so Henderson's like, all right, come with me. Right. And takes him to the science lab and has this whole display about how, despite all of these different techniques that one might employ to try to change their finger. Look, I'm holding them up as if we're doing a video podcast, but it's the Italian in me. I can't help it. But, and essentially nothing works. Nothing will have that permanent effect. What I want to know, and this is so minor and nitpicky, Henderson is telling someone to turn the lights on and off. Who's there? There's nobody there.
Oh, that's a great point.
I don't think they're voice activated lights. He's just lights on, lights off. Presumably there's just someone off camera right there, but it's just kind of funny to me. Like you never see even like the back of someone's head as they're walking out. It just seems to magically happen.
I guess anybody in the police station, if Henderson told you to do something, you'd do it. So if you're walking down the hall and he tells you to turn the lights off, you turn his lights off.
Yeah. You know what though, like this scene, again, the dart scene I liked for the camaraderie, but plot wise, I was getting a little bored. This scene though, I liked because at least it was taking it to the next step where it's like, hey, like you keep talking about changing fingerprints. Like I want to show you like this is not a thing. So I like that.
Yeah. And then my young detective mind, of course, went straight to, all right, That was the mid 1950s. It wasn't possible then. Is it possible in 2024? So what do you think?
I did a very cursory Google search of this. I think it's possible, but like really, really difficult. Is that what did you come up with?
The short answer is it's not possible.
Okay.
Fingerprints are formed 3 months before you are born, and they run deep. So any surface alteration that you might do, even if it went 6, 7 layers into your epidermis, would grow back within a month.
Okay. So this holds up. The science holds. The science
Henderson's
holds.
right. And in fact, Henderson is still right.
Well, speaking of science, so Clark asks, would it be possible to track the tires from Morell's car back to the hideout? And Henderson says, it's possible, but it would, all of a sudden he's a scientist now, this guy. It requires supervision. So thankfully he's talking to the right guy. And this is also where Clark asks for the mask, because I think the cover story is the Daily Planet sketch artist wants to draw it, right?
Yeah. It's lame.
But, again, Henderson goes with it. Again, that level of trust and cooperation. So then, Superman's in action. He traces the tires and tracks them back to the hideout. And when he gets there, he's got the pants and the overcoat and the lead mask, right? And he goes in. Thankfully, they don't ask him anything. They're just like, all right, you come. The Mitchell, right, is taking him to pull a job at the Daily Planet of all places, right, to nab the payroll right before it's moved.
Which begs our favorite question: how much money does the Daily Planet operate with? That in all of Metropolis, the big score would be the Daily Planet payroll.
So one of the episodes, The Boy Who Hated Superman, that's coming up. We're still a little ways away from that. But there's business in that episode when Clark brings the juvenile delinquent who's staying with him to the planet. And Lois needs to take money out of petty cash to donate to charity or something like that. And there's this whole discussion about they need a lot of cash on hand because they never know when they're going to have to, buy a plane ticket for a reporter or this and that. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about now on two levels, just the use of cash generally, right? Where that's so unheard of today, but also a newspaper, cash or otherwise, like being that flush with funds is kind of staggering.
But I guess this is the day where, everything was cash. And so if you could get the payroll truck, those were just driving around for the taking if you knew when and where. So
yeah.
Well, welcome to the good old days of good guys and bad guys.
I know. Now, I guess this isn't spelled out for us yet. We'll learn it later. But at this point in time, the Mitchell who's on the job with him is the real Mitchell, because he's when he hands Superman in disguise the drill, Superman recognizes those as the real Mitchell's fingerprints, which is quite, again, going back to the amount of time he's really memorized those fingerprints. That's really something. Yeah.
But I could see that. And I even could see Clark not knowing exactly how he was going to nab Mitchell. A very, very obvious thing to do would be to sit for 5 minutes and stare at the police fingerprints that they did have on Mitchell and commit them to memory. That I could very much plausibly see him doing as prep. And I love the Detective Clark, because some of the things he does, it's practically like Bruce Wayne worthy of how he'll set a trap.
Yes. Yeah. I even just the idea of him going undercover like that, I liked it. It felt unexpected, but totally tracked with this version of the character. So they go into the next room and Superman, refresh my memory. Does he reveal himself to Mitchell first, or does he knock him out while he still has his helmet on?
Well, he still has his helmet on.
All right. So he chops him. And this is not the first chop we'll get when we get to the big climax here. He's karate chopping all of them. Boy, do I miss my fisticuffs. I miss them so much. It's just not the same. The karate chops are not the same. I know we got to tone it down for the kids, but I do miss them, but I'll live with it. So he knocks out Mitchell in this adjoining office here, and then Jim Olsen springs into action and smashes a chair over Superman's back, and then Superman reveals himself. And it's this great moment between the two of them, and you see Superman remove his disguise, right? To the point
overcoat.
Where the helmet and the coat come off, and so he's just in the dress pants. And it's so funny, like just the idea of him being in a disguise, yet in all these other instances, no one's ever able to suss out that Clark is Superman, when we're just talking about this idea of disguises. But it's this great exchange where Jim is like, oh, those pants, like if I knew whose pants those were, I know who you really are. And here's what I loved, and credit to the show here, because I feel like it would have been so easy for Superman to make some remark about, oh, wouldn't you like to know, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which would have driven me nuts, because it's like, any chance you get, like, why don't you just try to dispel the notion that you're a guy hiding among them, right? Like, if I'm Superman, I want people to think I'm not anybody else. So right. I like the idea that he said to Jimmy, he's like, I just bought these for $2, like down at the thrift store. Like, get off my back, kid. I like that. But it was a fun exchange between the two of them.
And it was great to see Jimmy play the Lois role just for a second of, wow, we sure, completed this caper and all is well with the world again. But gosh darn it, I sure would love to know who Superman is. And if I could only find out whose pants those were. So just that little button at the end of the episode that we're used to, it was refreshing to get it from Jimmy. It triggered in me, though, what I thought was the biggest irony of this entire episode. It is from beginning to end been about fingerprints. Now, Jimmy's come in the room and Superman has taken off the lead mask and he's set it on the desk. After he says, these are just $2 pants, Jimmy, don't worry about it. He then leaves the room. Superman's fingerprints are on that mask. All Jimmy would have to do is take the mask, take it to Perry, who I'm sure he knows has a fingerprint kit, and he could say, Perry, I've got Superman's fingerprints. We could find out who he is. Then Perry would do that, and then he would go, Jimmy, you bonehead, these are Clark's fingerprints. And then Jimmy would go, well, how could that be? And then Clark would say, well, I borrowed them from Inspector Henderson so that, we could get the sketch artist to do the sketch. And look, here's the sketch. And everyone would go, Jimmy, just get out of my office, you bonehead. And that would have been like right at the cliff of, you didn't think this all the way through, Clark. But then we realized, yes, he did.
I like that. I would have sacrificed the dart scene for that, right? I think that would have been a fun little capper to the episode there. Oh, I like that. Oh, alas. But it was a fun exchange between them. And then this takes us to our climax here at the hideout where Superman shows up and Jimmy and Lois are there, and Superman karate chops all of them and brings out the guy who had been pretending to be Mitchell, right? Canfield, who's actually Canfield, right? And the masked man from the Daily Planet, of course, is the real Mitchell. So it stands revealed that they were two all along, that Mitchell had never undergone these surgeries, but that he just had this other guy claiming that he was Mitchell post-surgery. So doubles all along. How satisfying did you find the whole wrap up? So, and then we have our final button of Jimmy getting his head stuck in the helmet. But it was satisfying enough. It would have been more satisfying if we had seen the other guy at some point. Like, I guess this wouldn't make any sense, though, because the other, we do see, not the best way of explaining it, but it's like, it didn't feel like, I don't know, it didn't have the payoff that I think I would have wanted from, it was really two all along. There's a certain movie that comes to mind, and it's been out for many years, but I still don't want to spoil it because it's a great reveal. But like that movie, when you get to that payoff, it's like, oh man, and you want to go back and watch it again. This wasn't that. So it felt fine, like it worked, but I didn't have that oh my God, I can't believe it sort of thing. I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, and if the movie you're referencing, the wife says, "Today you mean it."
Exactly.
I know which movie you're talking about. I felt like it didn't have quite that punch at the end, because we as the viewers, we knew from the very beginning that Marty was pulling the scam. So if all that happens at the end is that people caught Marty, then, oh, okay, yay, but again, some of these episodes that have happened, especially in season 1, they have such zingers at the end. that you almost sort of expect what kind of cool twist or punch, or if not that, just something that was sort of like the stick the landing line, or what exactly is Clark going to say right before he winks at the camera that's going to make us go ah. And this I didn't feel had that. Jimmy got his head stuck in the mask and went, "Oh, I'm stuck," and I thought that was almost like a Scooby-Doo joke ending instead of a real punchy, powerful Superman ending.
Yeah, you want an ending you want a button that pays off something that's come before in a more meaningful way, as opposed to just the gag of him being stuck in the helmet.
Right. And I'm not sure why Jimmy would have put his head in there and gotten stuck. It was just, there was no preface to it. People are talking, and next thing you know, the camera goes and Jimmy's stuck. So I thought, okay, I never want to just throw shade and not plant a tree, right? So what if the ending to this wasn't so much that the crime was ill-conceived as much as that this game of chicken, this mental chess match that Clark and Marty were playing this whole time, when it plays out to the very end, let's say they'd taken all the precautions, the lead mask was still on, they hadn't touched anything, and Superman still comes in and goes, "You're Marty, and I'll prove it." If during any of Clark's research he had found that at any time Marty had broken a bone in his leg or had suffered a bullet wound from some shootout, that those scars would still be evident on his body, X-ray vision could quickly point out who is Marty. So Superman comes in a room, let's say they're all wearing masks, and he grabs one guy and he goes, "You're Marty." And all the other crooks take their masks off. "Well, this did us no good. You said he'd never know who we are because he can't see through lead." And they ask him, "How did you know?" And he says, "Well, you may be able to fool each other, but you can't fool Superman."
I like it. No, I like the rewrite. Yeah.
And then wink to the camera, and they never know. They never know how he knew, but word goes out in the underworld, hiding behind lead doesn't help you. He'll still know who you are. Maybe we should get out of this racket.
I like that. Yeah, no. And you know what? No. And I appreciate you saying, you don't want to just, knock it without offering some kind of alternative. So I admire that. And I think that's an elegant solution. And, going back to what I was saying before about, how it doesn't feel as satisfying because you don't see both of them. I mean, again, you see Canfield pretending to the criminals that he's Mitchell, but you never see the real Mitchell until the very end. And to maybe better explain what I was trying to get at before, as this has been marinating, I feel like, and maybe this would have gotten too convoluted, but if the real Mitchell had been like a background guy in those scenes at the hideout, like in some sort of disguise, well, I don't know what, like glasses, like glasses and a fake beard, something like that. Like he's hiding in plain sight. Like I feel like that's the kind of reveal that I think was just missing here. So yeah, the reveal, I don't know, didn't kind of achieve everything that I would have wanted for the payoff to this episode. But overall, I don't know, man, like this, was really a solid one. Is there, before we give our final rating, anything else about this that we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
No, I think I injected, pretty much everything I thought as a kid and what I thought on rewatch. I loved the cat and mouse of it all. And it kept me interested the entire time. I think it would keep most viewers interested the entire time. If you don't know how it's going to end, you want to know in what way it unfolds. And in that way, it's very well written. Any story that keeps you hooked all the way through is a good episode. And as fast as they were churning these things out at the time, with just go by your gut, turn in a script, film it. Where's the next one? We're already late. It was good. Yeah.
No, overall. So out of 5 fedoras, how many would you give this one?
I give it a 4, a full 4.
I give it a 4 as well. This is a solid 4 for me. So yeah, no, this, again, especially like I said, sandwiched between 2 exceptionally strong installments. This one holds its ground, I think, in the middle of those two. So I enjoyed this discussion very much. I appreciate you coming on here. Where would you like to direct folks if they want to follow you and all of your cosplaying adventures?
On Instagram, look for Wearing the Cape. And for some of my other thoughts on Superman in general, I have articles from time to time on dailyplanetdc.com.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone will check that out. Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure. And I look forward to having you back here at the end of the year for the season 2 finale, Around the World with Superman.
5 fedoras.
Already getting the rating in now. Fair enough. Audience, I appreciate you tuning in. As always, make sure you come back next week for the one that I know we've all been waiting for, myself included. It's Panic in the Sky. Don't miss it. And until then, remember, only Superman can do super things. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.